Dr. Joe Vitale is reframing Judges 19 as a morally redemptive story, arguing that it confronts readers with the reality of abuse and compels them to recognize how far society can fall when it abandons God's moral standards. She suggests that the Levites' callousness, the brutal rape and murder, and the ensuing war are intentionally presented as a mirror of moral collapse, a warning about living by personal preference rather than divine command. She emphasizes that while the Levite, the rapists, and even the people of Israel ignore the woman, God sees her, giving her story dignity by preserving it in Scripture. Dr. Joe connects this to other biblical moments where abused women are seen by God, such as Hagar or the sinful woman in Luke 7, and uses this to conclude that God is deeply attentive to the suffering of the marginalized. However, this interpretation involves significant theological projection. Nowhere in Judges 19 does God speak, act, or even hint at condemnation. The narrative is starkly silent on divine judgment. If, as Dr. Joe claims, the story is meant to disturb and teach, why does the Levite face no consequences whatsoever? Instead of being questioned or punished, he becomes the rallying figure for a national war, treated as a victim of injustice rather than a participant in it. This absence of accountability undermines her argument that the story is critiquing his behavior. Dr. Joe also performs what could be called theological gymnastics by drawing modern concepts, such as trauma, consent, and survivor dignity, into an ancient tribal narrative that likely did not value women as individuals in the way she describes. The idea that this story is meant to comfort or vindicate women reads more like a retrospective justification than a fair reading of the text. Her use of other unrelated biblical stories, like Hagar's or Luke's Gospel, to suggest a divine theme of God seeing abused women imposes a narrative continuity that isn't present in the text itself. There's no link made by the Judges author between this unnamed concubine and other women in Scripture. Ultimately, Dr. Joe is trying to redeem a brutal, dehumanizing text by reading into it a God who is quietly working justice behind the scenes. While noble in motive, this approach risks obscuring the horror of the story by softening it with theology that the text doesn't support. It's a way of salvaging Scripture for modern readers, but it requires ignoring the possibility that the text simply reflects a patriarchal, tribal worldview where women were property, and where even God, if present at all, is eerily silent. Sure. Here's a sarcastic, witty breakdown of what Dr. Joe Vitale is doing in her talk, now with 37% more divine eye rolls. Dr. Joe Vitale bravely wades into Judges 19, the biblical equivalent of a Quentin Tarantino film with worse theology and fewer survivors. Her main pitch? That this horrific, misogynistic train wreck of a story, featuring rape, murder, and corpse dismemberment, isn't an endorsement of evil, but a moral object lesson. You see, God isn't absent. He's just silently watching from the corner, waiting for us to learn something. Like a divine therapist with a clipboard. Joe assures us the Levite isn't the hero. No, he's a cautionary tale, a man so pious he thinks protecting your concubine means throwing her to a mob to be gang-raped to death, and then mailing her chopped-up body parts like she's ancient Amazon Prime. But don't worry, she says, this is all meant to disturb you. It's not the Bible being awful, it's the Bible being deep. Next, Joe does some impressive theological yoga. She connects this horror story to Hagar, because she's also a concubine, obviously, and then brings in Jesus asking, "Do you see this woman?" from Luke 7. That's right, Judges 19 is feminist now, because Joe says God sees the victim. Never mind that the text itself doesn't say that, or that God never shows up, or that the Levite, the war-starting misogynist, walks away without so much as a divine timeout. What Joe is doing here is spiritual PR, cleaning up an ancient atrocity to make God look good in the age of Me Too. Yes, she implies this is gruesome, but it's important because it tells the truth. Except, it doesn't tell the truth. It tells our truth, that in ancient Israel, women were property, justice was a bloodbath, and apparently God was on vacation. In the end, Joe's message is, don't cancel Judges 19, it's here to help. But let's be honest, that's like saying the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a public service announcement about home security. So sure, we can say God sees the woman, but in this story, He apparently sees, stays silent, and lets the worst guy in the room start a holy war. Inspiring stuff.